Purple Points. Purple Points is part of the Scholars On lineup where we have online engagement with media, critical issues, critical conversations. So I'm very excited about this edition of Purple Points, as I am with most, but this one's special. I have Dr. Carlton Usher, who's an associate professor of political science in the Department of First Year and Transition Studies at Kennesaw State University. He is multifaceted, multi-talented, trained as a historian and a political scientist. He teaches in several departments across several disciplines and has a distinguished academic career and has mentored many students. I am proud to say I'm one of those. In addition to his many accomplishments, I could read this all day and that would be the interview. But I want to talk quickly about some of the things that he's done. He has a book, one of my favorites, A Rhyme is a Terrible Thing to Waste, which came out in 2005. And a lot of the conversation that's going on in hip-hop academic circles, he was talking about back in the early part of this decade. So if you haven't seen it, you should go get it. And then, of course, back in the day, The Remix, which came out in 2011, another excellent book. Both of those, the first one as well as The Remix, you got to cop those important documents of hip-hop history. So I'm happy to have him here. Dr. Usher, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I'm good. Dr.
Man,
Houston, it's a pleasure.
man, it's
This
an
is
honor. It's an
this
honor,
is
actually.
this is full. The audience may not know that you were a student of mine in the in African American history,
Absolutely.
and you excelled.
Well, thank you.
In fact, you made my job easy, and it was fulfilling because having brothers in the classroom who are interested in the subject matter, you know how that is as a professor now, to have
Definitely.
students who are shaking their head at what you're saying and agree or disagree with your position. So I definitely appreciate having you. And to the extent that you are doing well, I take no credit for that, but I'm so proud of you, my brother. I'm so proud of you. That's the truth. I'm so proud of you.
Man, I appreciate it. I'm
Yes,
humbled.
sir.
And
All
and
right.
you should take some credit. I took a lot of the rigor that I learned from not just your class. I don't know if I ever told you this, but when I was in the library going to get books, going to study, I would always see you there. And I was like, not only
Yes.
is he teaching the class, he's hitting the book.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
I have no
That's
excuse.
right. Yeah, I spent much of my time in E 185.
Hmm.
I'm a E 185er. You know what those books are.
Yeah, no
You know,
doubt, no doubt. I
it's
was down there many times myself in Club
yeah.
Woody, as we
That's
used to
right.
call it affectionately.
That's right.
Spent many day and night up in that piece.
That's right. This is an honor. Let's get rocking. I'm ready.
All right. So one of the questions I usually ask is, what comes to mind when you think of The Color Purple, the film The Color Purple?
Whew. Well, obviously controversy. I mean, that's the first thing that pops up. History pops up. Um, uh, Women's lives.
Hmm.
These are some sort of uh, buzzwords that when people talk about it, and myself included, my first sort of experience with the book was uh, quite negative, frankly.
Okay.
Um, I was forced to read it. And so you know how that is when they're forced to read something, right? Well,
Okay.
here's how it went down because I went to. I can back up and start talking. Let's start talking about uh, what predated this book and the
Okay.
context. Well, this book comes out in '82, I believe. We really start seeing it in '83, to be quite frank, because I remember at the time I had a family member who worked in a bookstore, and they got like 15 copies of this book almost every day. Every day we would be getting 15 copies of this book for some reason. Then we
Hmm.
started getting posters of this book, and I took a copy of it, but I never read it. And we went to my family would send me upstate uh, on vacation to get us out of the city because the context was, listen, 85 was 85 in New York City.
Okay.
85 is on the backdrop of a lot of crazy stuff that was happening, including the crazy, we had a crazy mayor. We had Larry, stuff was going on with Larry Davis and the police,
Right.
right? Right. So there's a lot of stuff that was happening, and I ended up being sent away for, which was a vacation, but that book went with me. And I don't know what I did. I don't really want to talk about what I did wrong, but that became punishment for me to read that book. And
Okay.
I hope anybody listening, you never punish children by forcing them to do something that they should want to do, which is read.
Okay.
Right? Because you're making a negative association, right? But by 85, we've had Nintendo came out in 85. See, 85 is an interesting year for me because a bunch of things happened. I was on my way to college that January of 86. So I was getting ready for school, and I remember Nintendo came out. I remember I had an advanced copy. Don't ask me how I got it, but She Gotta Have It was out, right? Remember that?
Okay.
But movies like the Jesse Owens story, because I remember how powerful that was to see that, because I was actually going to go to college and run track.
Okay.
The movie Brother from Another Planet, which was way before its time.
Yeah. Jim Jarmusch.
Yes, not to be confused with Homeboy from Another Planet, right?
Right.
That was
Whole another conversation.
License to Kill, License to Ill. The Beastie Boys was out because I remember I bought that album. Schoolie D came out with the PSK stuff, right?
Right. Yeah.
Stetsasonic, the first hip hop band, because people think the Roots is the first hip hop band, but
Right.
Stetsasonic is actually the first hip hop band. So there was a lot of stuff going on. You know, Biz came out, because I remember all of these things because I took that stuff with me on my way to school. And ironically, the first English lit course that I took, the professor did in fact use The Color Purple.
Okay.
So I was already sort of, I knew the book already. I resented some of the stuff that I was getting from the book because, my elders didn't particularly care for the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I read it with that context. I read it with the context that mostly men in my community didn't particularly care for the book, and the fact that I was forced to read it. But when I got to this, it was an English lit course, African American lit course, I changed my mind about it and started really digging deeply into this book.
What was it
Well,
about the book that changed your mind?
the complexity, as we grow, we become complex people, and we start recognizing the complexity in others and other people's lives. That everything isn't, a straight line. It either is or it isn't. There's some fine lines in our lives, some gray areas, And so I started making. I think I became a feminist, if I can say that. At that point, I became a feminist in that I was no longer interested in looking at the world through, sort of the narrow lens as a man. And frankly, I don't know what your education background was, but I was trained by men.
Mm-hmm.
And I was trained by good men. And it was only until I got to really my second year in college that I had a significant amount of women who were giving me alternative views on the same thing that, I learned prior to from men. And it was a different context. And so that was, sort of what changed my mind about it.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, something that's powerful about what you're saying is that you had context for the book before the movie. And
Yes.
Oftentimes our understanding of historical events, people, places is the movie and then maybe the book.
Yes.
So your perspective on the film is going to be quite different than others who only saw the movie. So moving to the film, I mean, given your background with the book, how do you think the film works as it moves from page to screen?
Well, we've had we've had quite a few people discuss that. The reality that in most movies, I mean, we can say that of any movie, Malcolm and all of those other movies where, when the book becomes sort of visual, that there's some sort of artistic sort of leverage that takes place, if you want to put it that way.
Mm-hmm.
I think, one thing really stands out for me in that book is Mr. The reconciliation with Mr. That bothered me quite a bit.
Okay.
From the book to the movie. I don't think it should have happened. it happened in the movie, and I don't think it should have happened.
Okay.
You know, and it's this sort of, it gives this sort of feel good thing at the end, which is sort of a movie. You know, that's the movie sort of direction in movies, is that, you know, okay, we have people, we have a dilemma, we have a problem, we solve the problem, and we live happily ever after. And that sort of bothered me about this particular story, because the triumph should not have been his per se, or
Okay.
he should not have participated or enjoyed it. But I think it's a parallel to be quite frank, to black men in this society and how we responded to this book. This idea that somehow we continuously need to be the center or the centrality of the experience, that anything that is happening connected to black people or America generally, that somehow we have this idea that we need to be at the center of it. And the fact is, we are at the center of the American experience. But we have to make a case about what is at the center. This is not, you know, this is not a Tootsie Pop where there's some good stuff at the center, right? The way that we're depicted at the center is, you know, there's some poison at the center, the way that we're depicted. But nonetheless, this idea that we have that somehow if women tell their stories the way that they want to, there's a huge problem in that for us if the story that they tell doesn't make us look, you know, like the heroes or the warriors that we think that we are. And so, I mean, I could, you know, we have countless hundreds of critiques. My favorite, of course, is Reed. Reed's critique is my favorite because he captures the crux of what most men who are, if we consider ourselves intellectual or teachers or whatever, community whatever it is, that what he had to say about this movie pretty much captures what most men in these positions had to say about the movie. And that was my piece, you know. Like I said, when I went away to school, that's what I took with me. But I changed my mind about the movie, but I haven't changed my mind about some central things, which is the Spielberg, for example.
Okay.
That's still a problem for me. The all black cast is still a problem for me, and here's why. Because at the point where Suge says everything that's been done to me, been done to you.
Mm-hmm.
That's the movie I want to make.
Okay.
Let's talk about what was done to you, because that gives context to the men in this scenario. And the fact is, this wasn't about you per se. You're in it, but it's not about you. Let me frame it this way: if women came to us and said, "I'm not reading the autobiography of Malcolm X because women are in the foreground of that," that would sound absurd, right?
Okay. Yeah.
But that's how it sounds to women, I think, when we say that we don't like these movies or these books and so on because they speak a particular sort of ugliness about us, true or untrue, fiction or fact, somewhere in the middle. And so I had to come off of that. I had to let that go and say, hey, wait a minute. This is someone else's story. You know, in our lives, we don't write the scripts all the time, but sometimes we have to, we're actors and no one, you know, asked us, you know, well, what do you think of this script? And that's not our place. You know, we don't run this stuff. But I do have some fundamental problems with some of the things that I think that Spielberg interpreted. So, but just overall, I think that, you know, I would rather, if people ask me all the time, would I rather have this movie or not have the movie or the book? And are we better that it's here? And I'll say yes to that every day, that I think it's a piece of art, which brings us to this other sort of issue, which is, you know, like, it's fiction. You know, people were up in arms. I don't know if you remember this, but
I remember, yeah.
You know,
I was very young, but my mother and I went to the premiere the first night, and then we went back the next night, and then we went back the next weekend 2 more times with different sets of her girlfriends, and they, you know, had these real intense conversations. There were tears, you know, it was cussing. It was
Yeah.
all range of emotions. So I mean, I
Yeah.
was young and didn't fully understand the complexity of the story and what they were
Yeah.
talking about. I just knew
Yeah.
that it mattered. So, you know, a lot of my childhood memory around
Hmm.
85 in particular was
Yeah.
Conversations, Color Purple, and I remember my mom buying the album. And I always been
Hmm.
into albums, and I just was like, wow, this album is
You
purple.
imagine
This is
that,
hot.
right?
So
Interesting stuff. Yeah,
yeah, but
but
you know, one of the things you said I kind of wanted to
mhm.
follow up on is,
Yeah.
you know, and if I'm mistaken, you correct me. The fact that black men, a lot of the criticism was that black men weren't shown with depth and complexity. So you got Mister, you have his father, and Harpo to some degree. There's this anger, there's this frustration, and a lot of the stuff that they do, the violence, psychically, physically, emotionally to black women happens. So if you're
Right.
just watching the film, it's like, wow, these black men are monsters. Notwithstanding Celie's raped by her stepfather. So it's just this, wow, black men are so horrible, but there's no context for
Right.
understanding what would make a person do this. So, you know, my question is, what do you think men can learn, specifically black men can learn from watching the film and perhaps having conversations about, you know, different layers of masculinity?
Hmm. Whoa. That's a lot there, pal. Well, listen, watching this movie like any other movie, I would make the case that art is, but how can I put this in a way that would serve both of us? Well, Amiri Baraka said that art should be a razor,
Mm-hmm.
and he purposely used the word and misspelled the word, a cross between the razor that you would use to shave or what have you, and a razor to lift something up.
Mm-hmm.
And he meant both of those things in the same word. And that to me is the complexity of how we should be looking at this. That listen, that razor cuts, but it's also designed, to build you up. And I know we may not see that in this particular context that we're discussing here. That sometimes there's we're ugly and we're beautiful too, like Langston Hughes says. But
Mm-hmm.
um, to me, I think that black masculinity um, is sort of a comfort that in the mix of all of this other stuff that we have to deal with, it's a pillow for us. And so imagine in our minds, we think that our sisters are pulling that pillow from under our heads. And our first response to that is, you don't care about black men, or you just, dogging black men and so on and so forth, without seeing that, hey, you know what? Once we remove this pillow, we can't talk if you're half asleep or if you're comfortable on that pillow. We
Mm-hmm.
can't have any conversations. And so we remove that pillow because black women can make the case that, you know what, I helped put that pillow there for you.
Right.
There's something else that we need to think about, which is black women gave birth to us, right? And that sounds simple enough. But when black women give birth to us in art, oh, we take a whole different place, a different position on that, because nature doesn't control that. See, there's a certain phenomenon that might control uh, what we our interation our relationships with mother and son and so on and those kinds of things. But in the way that Alice Walker uh, presents her novel, that art that she gives birth to, we don't like it because we don't control that, whatever she decides to do with that person, with that
Mm-hmm.
individual. Now, don't get me wrong, because I do believe that you can tell a story without degrading people, and that you can get those points across without going to that extreme. I thought that it was important that our community talk about things like rape and incest, violence against women, and so on and so forth. My issue is the forum, the
Mm-hmm.
platform, especially with the history that we've had. And so, in terms of black men and masculinities, on the one hand, I'm like, it's supposed to be protected, and I understand why we are guarded in that way. But on the other hand, we need to sort of redefine what that means.
Mm-hmm.
See, black masculinities generally speak to a level of impatience. Now or never. Do it like this, or this is how it should be done. That kind of stuff
Mm-hmm.
over and over
Okay.
again. And those sort of phrases speak to a ownership, something that's important to us, this ownership, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because over and over again, the history says that there are other people on our backs with their level of ownership. And so it's hard for us to reconcile, you know, the self, and the community, which is one of the things that I think I wanted to address also is this idea of black masculinity as a community form, not simply in terms of individuals, because what has happened in the last 10 years, I think, especially connected to rap music and so on and so forth, where the individual is at the center of everything, not, it's not about black men. So
Mm-hmm.
we could bring up Rakim, and you can say Rakim is a black man, so therefore we're talking about black men. But no, we're talking about Rakim. You
Mm-hmm.
get it? So
I'm with you.
there's the individual that when we talk about black masculinities, we use the individual as the example, and I think that that has its usefulness, but I think we need to talk about it in a sort of communal way. That black masculinities, what is the collective sort of accumulated ideal of what that really is? I think we need to have that conversation. We know what it is, but we don't have the conversation.
Mm-hmm.
To me it's about fatherhood, it's about friendship, it's about protection, it's about loyalty, it's about commitment. All of those things, I can't say that I don't know any black men that don't live those things out. I mean, we do. We live those creeds every day, right, in our lives. But it is the sort of uh, benign sort of, uh, it's benign only in the context that when sisters critique it, we wake up to it.
Mm-hmm.
But we wake up not in a way that we're actually interested in solving that issue. We wake up defensively. We wake up like, "Why'd you wake me up?" Sort of kind of deal, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so, and we see that over and over again in what we produce. We see that over and over again in the response to the movie. I mean, for example, I grew up with Tony Brown and Gil Noble,
Ah, yeah, like it is.
right? Yeah, right. And Tony Brown's Journal and Gil Noble and so on and so forth. And they were adamantly like, these guys usually are sort of centered. When this movie came out, I remember specifically Tony Brown and how he called it one of the most racist things that he's ever seen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I remember this happened. This happened. I actually saw this particular show, the Phil Donahue show. It was on. I think it was on NBC, and they had a program connected to The Color Purple, where the brother that wrote Tom Coon's
Donald Bogle.
Bogle was on that show. Tony Brown was on that show, and a couple of other folks, right? And they just ripped into it because, again, my point was you woke up defensively,
Mm-hmm.
right? Yeah. What are your thoughts about,
I
black
mean,
masculinities in this context and so on?
it was one of those things. I think at the time, I've had like a couple segues into conversations with the film. First, as a child, going to see it with my mom's
Yeah.
more than once. I forget how many times we saw it in the theater, but I was there like 2-3 times at least. So I
Yeah.
knew it was significant, and it kind of reminded me of for colored girls who consider suicide.
Oh yeah.
I didn't know. I mean, I was young. I don't know how old I was, but just only thing I knew is my mom really liked this. We had the book. I remember going to see the play. My mother was in the theater at that time too,
Okay.
so
All right.
I remember those pieces of it, but just like okay, it's important, whatever. And then getting older, actually at Clark Atlanta University, I took a film
Okay.
class,
All right.
and it was film theory and criticism, and one of the films was The Color Purple, and so we read the Reed critique, and I think I went out and I got Ed Guerrero had a piece on it, and
Yes, I'm familiar with that.
I'm trying to think. I think Alice Walker was sort of ambivalent. It was in the paper. This is before the days of just going on the internet, but
Right.
I had to go to the library and like find the paper.
Not those days.
You know what I'm saying? So uh, she wasn't really clear. At the time, I was like, do you agree or do you not? And I was, in that black or white kind of space.
Yeah.
But I think now, thinking about it, here's your novel. It's been turned into a film by one of the most powerful producer directors at the time, still today.
Sure.
Which tells us something about Hollywood politics. But I realized that, okay, you've taken my novel and you've turned it into another medium. So yeah, I'm grateful that my work is being shown in another form, but there's some challenges I have. But let's see how this goes. So, I mean, that's how I would read it now. At the time, I was like, he's not really saying yes or no.
Right. Which is, I'm assuming we learn to be diplomatic like that in our assessment of art.
Yes.
Because it's subjective. Because it's subjective.
Yeah. That in my young, 19, 18, however old I was, it's like, look, what's up? How you feel about it? Like, you mentioned Akil. There's no, he's the best. Period.
Right. There's no fine line. There's no conversation. Right.
Yeah,
right.
So
got you. Yeah.
That's kind of where I was, and I remember in class just feeling like, I don't know if I like this movie.
Right.
Because again, although when I think about it, I was trained as well by women, and I had a lot of men in my community. There was a man by the name of Paul Stewart who ran a Black Western Cowboy Museum.
Wow, interesting.
And so a lot of times he'd just be like, hey, come here. And he sit me down and just start telling me about history.
That's what's up.
Tell me about Bill Pickett. It was like, you can't leave until
That's right.
you can repeat what I'm telling you. So,
and Henderson and people like that, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, he was just, doing the knowledge, giving me all this information. And, I had people like that. So when I saw the film, it didn't really add up to my experiences with, the Black community. But on the flip, my mother is a psychotherapist, and a lot of her work is in domestic violence, intimate partner violence.
Okay.
So there was that reality.
Yes.
So I was like, I don't know. And I think I just kind of defaulted to, why do Black men look so bad?
Right.
So that's kind of where I was. And then a couple years later, I get to film school, and there's The Color Purple again. So, I'm reading it, and some of my classmates, two sisters, in fact, that was their favorite movie. And I was like, how is this your favorite movie? I don't understand. So I was kind of in a different space. I think I had grown in terms of my feminist lens, and I started to understand it differently. But I think it took some maturing, and then just reading more work by Black feminist scholars.
Absolutely.
So I think between undergrad and graduate school, getting exposed to Barbara Smith, Patricia Hill Collins.
Oh yeah.
Gwendolyn Brooks.
Right.
And just reading.
Yes.
So I think that's what really sort of shifted. And then it's like once you read and you start to see the world differently, it's like, wow, wait a minute.
That's right. The Great Awakening, as we call it.
Yeah, right? It was powerful.
Absolutely.
It was powerful.
Yeah. And I wanted to add too that what I saw in '85, around February of '86, really, I'm on the train in New York City. I'll kid you not, I'm on the express train in New York City, and I'm in this one car, and I'm at the end, and I look down the car, and I see at least 10 copies of that book. And you know how New York City is with the train, that sisters and men and women generally will sit there, especially if it's a long trip, and read. And I was just taken aback by just about every Black woman that I saw on that train. I remember that because I had read the book already, and I was still sort of confused about it, like, what's this thing here? Why we look so bad in this thing? And why are all these women on the train reading this thing? Now that I'm older, I'm like, that was such a valuable experience for me to see that, right? Because seeing it in those numbers just really clarified for me that it's really not about you, pal.
And then that's okay.
Right.
Like you said before,
and that's okay. Right.
You don't have to be the center point.
Right.
So I wanted to ask you sort of a related question.
Yeah.
Because one of the reasons why I'm doing this is because so many of the conversations in the film are still relevant.
Oh boy.
Black Lives Matter as a whole intimate partner violence, and then just the silence on love in the black community. I'll use love as sort of like a generic umbrella, but love in terms of how do we love each other as black men? How do we articulate that in a healthy way? How do we love black women, heterosexual relationships, same gender loving relationships? How do you see this conversation of the color purple in the context of what black love looks like today?
Interesting. Man, you ask these deep, these are evening, nighttime questions. These are post 4 o'clock questions. But, the first thing that, the movie to me now, I tell people that it has a tremendous love ethic in it. That maybe it was, like I said, it's not about us, but the love ethic that's there. This idea that there's a standard for us in terms of our understanding of what love is. That really, we have this sort of cake, this plastic cake idea about what love is. That love happens when things are good, and if you're tested, that can't be love. And I look at it now that I'm older, I'm an old man, I see that, love is about being tested. Now, obviously, this movie, there's some, a lot of things in that movie that, that test was too hard. That's too much stuff for you to be, getting tested on, per se.
Okay.
But one of the things that we ought to think about in terms of love is that it's not static. It's not balloons and whistles. That's the result. And I ask people all the time, do you think that when we talk about love in any context, are you talking about it as a activity, as an action word? Or are you looking at it as a destination in the final place, or a noun? Because I can have a conversation with you truly if you are looking at it as a destination as opposed to an ongoing activity and action, because it's fluid. It never, it's a fluid notion. And that is reflected in Alice Walker's book as well. So the way that I frame it is that in Black Love in the Hour of Chaos is how I put it.
Okay.
Right? Because, when we talk about love, again, we have this idea about how it ought to be, this idea of real love. And so I believe that there's a tremendous love ethic in this particular piece of art. Now, your question about Black love itself, man, I want to make it sort of contemporary and remove it for a second outside of this book.
Okay.
But disaster capitalism is killing us. And what I mean by disaster capitalism is that people are making money from our misery, and so misery becomes the standard mode. If you told me that selling flowers would be to my benefit, I'll grow flowers out back. And so people are benefiting from this disaster capitalism. And what I mean by the disaster capitalism is we have all of these radio morning talk shows that just people are just going in on each other. In worse ways that it's just so sort of violent. It's the same sort of violence that, it may exist physically, but there's a certain level of emotional violence that was in that movie, in that book, that we experience every morning from these fools.
Right.
They go back and forth, and they're spreading these rumors about each other and so on and so forth in pop culture, and who's doing what and what happened with so-and-so, and so-and-so has beef with, and that's, to me, that emotional violence is still sort of here with us. And I think that book was about exposing it, saying, wait a minute. And instead, it just seemed like it just sort of multiplied, and maybe it's because of media too, but it just seems like, so I'm saying in essence that this idea of Black love, we will have to strip all of this stuff and start from the ground. I don't believe that, this is one of those scenarios when we talk about loving each other that we can sort of just pick up where we left off, sort of, kind of, right? I don't think there's a blueprint for Black love in a sort of communal, collective way, because we still have issues of spatial control, right? When about spatial control of Black men, when we talk about, like I give the example of I go to the Tabernacle here in Atlanta, and on a Tuesday night I think I went to see a group sort of like Beck.
Okay.
I can't remember the name of the group, but they, they're very talented dudes, what have you. That Thursday, I go and Most Def is performing, I believe. Yeah, it was Most Def. Well, on Tuesday, no police in the area. On
Okay.
Thursday, barricades, right? Right? So this idea of spatial control, even growing up in New York City, when the parks became dangerous, they started having parks sort of indoors, inside of buildings that you would have to pay to get into, stuff like that, right? Crazy stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But my point is with spatial control is that we're used to talking about that as a masculine issue, and we never address the spatial control that we impose on the women in our lives or the significant people in our lives,
Mm-hmm.
right? And we never have that conversation about it. And so I'm saying in essence that if we are interested, truly interested in recreating this love ethic that, I think is possible, I think it has to start at the at the root level, that we can't replace the branches. We can't even hope that the leaves grow back. I think that we're so far and I blame everybody, me too. Some of
Mm-hmm.
the, some of the African American, the black literature that I read, where, people are taking these little petty shots at each other at high levels and at high levels in terms of intellectual life,
Mm-hmm.
so how is that any different than those two cats that are going at each other on a record?
That's true.
So there's a
Yeah.
transformation that needs to take place, but I'm very hopeful. I know that it will happen. I don't have, I'm not pessimistic about that. I'm very optimistic about what's possible because I think, things are changing. Something good that I listened to, Dr. Rose made the case that, I'm down for all of this, just make it equal.
Mm-hmm.
Let's
Mm-hmm.
start at that place. And one of the things that I tell my students all the time is that there's enough room on this planet for both of us, for all of us, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so we have to start thinking in that way. We're playing this zero sum game now that our sisters are speaking to us in a firm manner, saying that, wait a minute, we're not having that anymore. What's wrong with saying we're not having that anymore?
Right. Right.
You
And
know what I'm
I
saying?
agree with you. And I think it's interesting that we in 2015 are having conversations about black women's lives matter too, as if the narrative Black
Right.
Lives Matter just means black men.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting. I keep thinking, for me, a lot of how I think about things is through a hip hop lens. So
Mm-hmm.
kind of thinking back in the day when Bakari Katwana's book came out, The Hip
Uh,
Hop Generation.
yeah,
He
I
had
love
that
that book.
chapter in there, the battle of the sexes. And so, you had the Mike Tyson situation. I think he
Correct.
talked about R. Kelly. Oh, no, he didn't talk about it. He talked about Tupac. And so if we fast forward, it's like the conversation is the same. The names are different. So,
Mm.
you take out Tyson, you put in Mayweather. You take
Yes.
out
Yeah.
Tupac, you put in
Yeah.
Chris Brown or Rihanna.
Yeah.
And it's almost if that same conversation it's like on one level, what have we learned? And another, it's like, wow,
Yeah.
where are we going from here? How are we adding on?
I agree. And I do believe that it has much to do with this idea of, like I said, disaster capitalism. That, listen, disaster capitalism was the enslavement of African people.
Mm-hmm.
Disaster capitalism was plantation life. Disaster capitalism is Jim Crow. Disaster capitalism is, producers making movies that they're detached from. Or I won't name anybody, but I know some people in hip hop who are significant players in hip hop that are totally detached from hip hop. They make a
Mm-hmm.
living from hip hop and hate black men. That's real. I grew up
Yeah.
with a couple of these cats. You know what I'm saying? And so, this idea of disaster capitalism, we have to confront the fact that people are benefiting from our misery and start there.
Right.
And by people, I don't just mean, people outside of our communities. I mean, there are people inside of our communities who are benefiting from our misery and see no need. Like, I sent 5 of my boys an email the other day saying to them that respectfully, in the next 2 years, please find another job. There are A&Rs at companies, at these hip hop, these artists, right? I told them, I'm like, yo, our friendship is going to change. Right here in Atlanta, I refused to join 100 Black Men because, they had this DJ who was a part of the group, right? You know who this cat is. I'm not gonna call his name, but he's a DJ and he's a part of this group and he's selling violence and misogyny and and
Mm-hmm.
and and, and women hatred to these kids, and then you turn around and you're in an organization of 100 black men, and you are inviting me to join, and so, I think we need to take a principled stand on this if we're serious. If I tell people all the time that the best thing that you can do for black women, instead of, claiming your feminism in front of any of them, is to act it out behind their back.
Mm-hmm.
You feel
I'm
me?
with you on that.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I struggle with calling myself that, because I feel like I've been socialized, to think as a man and do as a stereotypical man. And so part of the feminist work that I have carved out for myself is, do the work. Have
Yes,
those
absolutely.
conversations
Thank
with
you.
other men when they're not around.
Thank you.
Don't be on a panel in front of 1,000 people talking about your feminist politics, naming off books.
Oh,
Do the
geez,
work.
right.
So,
So we're gonna
that's
say,
kind of my position too.
yeah, and I think that will save us. I think that more of us, like, I don't know where you are in this, but one of the reasons that I stopped doing certain things, like for example, in my professional life, I'm focusing on retention, progression, and graduation in a lot of what I do. And
Mm-hmm.
so I actually, when I took the gig at Kennesaw, they told me that I would be teaching history and political science in the fall, and in the spring. I would be teaching my discipline in the spring rather, and in the fall, I would be teaching these first year courses, right? Because my idea was like, we need to retrain these young people. I could sit back and teach graduate courses and teach 5 students. But I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
we need to figure out a way to retrain these young people to think a little different. Because I have to be honest, teaching at both Spelman and Morehouse woke me up in terms of gender. At Morehouse, I didn't realize how chauvinistic these dudes were, right? And
Mm-hmm.
again, I'm not saying all of them, but the sort of culture, and I hope that's changed since I've been there. But I mean, I spent a lot of time in the classroom, like, how'd you come up with that? That kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And at Spelman, I was shocked too, because I was shocked at the the way that the young women agreed with those dudes. And that shocked me a little bit. So I was thinking that we have work to do. We have a lot of work to do. And so, my idea now is to try to impact, these young students, first year, second year. And we talk about, these different gender issues and these issues connected to identity in people's lives, because, at the end of the day, I mean, you're going to have to be good. This is not an option.
Mm-hmm.
You're going to have to be good to people who don't look like you,
Mm-hmm.
in whatever form that manifests itself, whether it's a woman or a man, a black person, a white person, a tall, skinny, short, fat. You're gonna have to learn, to be good to people who don't look like you, and that means everybody. And so to me, these are the sort of transcendental ideals that come out of books and art that we're supposed to be paying attention to in a deeper way, that I think we miss sometimes because we stay at surface level, sort of like where I was when I was 15 and getting a hold of that book.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a surface level sort of reading for me. And what I will do again in 2 years is I am going to go back to that book and read it again, because like I said earlier, as we grow, we grow.
Mm-hmm.
And the things
That's
that
true.
we see. And so I'm very sort of hopeful about um, what I think is possible for us. Definitely.
Okay. Wow. Yeah, I appreciate your time. And I wanted to sort of leave with this thought. If you were to teach the novel and the film in a class,
Hmm.
how would you prepare your students for it? What would be some takeaways that you would want them
Oh,
to get?
yeah. I would want them to. Well, first, I would ask, what do you think Alice Walker wants us to know?
Mm-hmm.
Right? What do you want us to know? And I would talk about selective perception, which is this tendency that we gravitate toward the things that we already sort of believe.
Okay.
And is that problematic? Because let's be clear, all those men that taught me, and listen, I'm not talking about random community cats. I'm talking about some of the elder professors that we're both familiar with, that trained me. And these are good men fundamentally, until they reach that point where they have to sort of confront the feminine and the female, and women, womanhood,
Mm-hmm.
or womanness. And so I would ask them to think about what it means to be trapped inside of a box. The house is a box. The room in the house is a box. If you're on a farm or a plantation, you're in that box. But the biggest box is what is up here. And that's what that movie offers us, is that box. How did these women get in that box? How did Mr. get in that box? How did he become who he is? And so I would speak to that issue and talk about this idea of a box, or a box inside of a box. And lastly, I would ask my students to place themselves inside of that story. And not necessarily to place yourself at that period of time, because I'm still sort of confused about exactly what time period that was, but not necessarily that, but place yourself in the context of the intellectual sort of the meaning and the social sort of order, the social relationships. Where would you place yourself in that? And so that's what I would do in terms of that particular story, and if I were to, and I probably will. I probably will, because I think I owe it to women who produce significant pieces of art, even women who don't. I owe it to them to make sure that I tell that story, because that story is not that story or their story. It still is our story. As cliche as that may sound, it still is our story.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure it would be as impactful as the classes I remember taking. So.
That's good of you. That's good of you, man. Akil, Dr. Houston. So you're gonna share the fact that you were a tenured professor, brother? That's amazing.
Well, thank you. I guess I will.
That is amazing.
It is. It really is.
Man,
just trying to walk in the footsteps.
I'm honored, man. This is
those giants, man.
Yeah, you are one of the reasons I continue to do what I do, because I watched you. What is it? It's over 20 years about.
It's been a minute. It's
right?
been a minute. Yeah, I think that was first, second year undergrad.
Yeah, watching you guys grow. The level of compassion that you have for your folks. I saw that in you as a student. This sort of need to contribute to the body politic, to contribute to literature and art. I saw that in you back then. So to watch you manifest that, and to watch that, happen for you, is a glorious thing for me. I think you probably think that tenure is a bigger deal for you than it is for me, but your tenure, man, that's a huge deal for me. It's like when you told me that, I said, wow, I got tenure. What? Like, I got tenure again. So I'm very proud of you, brother, and
I appreciate it.
I want the people who are reading, who are looking at this and hearing our voice, to know that this video is just another part of the commitment that you've made to make sure that you elevate, and elevate.
Absolutely. And I think it's important too for you to say that, because I think, at least with my students, they assume that I've always been reading.
Yeah.
And then poof, all this happened. But I think you giving the narrative some of my history, it didn't happen yesterday. So I appreciate that.
We work for what it is that we want. It's a simple idea. You work for what it is that we want, what we cherish, and what we think is valuable. So, my brother, I'm very proud of you. I generally don't do these kinds of things. I turn out interviews every week, and when you called me and said that you wanted me to participate in that, it wasn't even a second thought. So
I appreciate it. I'm honored. I appreciate it.
Well, keep it going, brother. Keep it going.
Will do. Thank you.
Thank you, man.
All right, peace.
Call me sometime, brother.
I will. Most definitely.
Okay. All right. Take care, man. That was great.